That's a choice. Everything's about choice, Mike.
So nobody's telling me who I want at the national dialogue.
Everything's
so there's
about
no choice. At least there was some choice.
Everything in life is about choice. We've made a choice. We're going to attend the dialogue because we want to have input. Ramaphosa's presidency has been abject, made worse by a GNU that is, for all intents and purposes, a eunuch.
Since the GNU is proving to be so bitterly disappointing and Parliament has become a joke, the official opposition is actually Mkhonto Wesizwe, but the only opposing they seem to do is within their own ranks. So, they're not doing the job of an official opposition. The EFF is a one-trick pony, and right now it seems like the only party doing any opposition politics in the South African Parliament is ActionSA. And joining us today is the leader of ActionSA in Parliament, Athol Trollip. Athol, welcome back.
Morning, Mark. Thanks very much.
Good to have you in dysfunctional Joburg.
I couldn't help smiling at your introduction. It's pretty much sums up our political situation.
Hell, it's a dreadful time. It seems like there's not. I can't see one party of note. I mean, I've said good things about the work you're doing in Parliament, but there's certainly not one party above you in the rankings, if I could put it, in the support, who are doing anything that resembles anything good for the country.
Yeah, Mark. So, look, I agree with you. I share your sentiments about the GNU. It's flattered only to deceive, really, and it's been more than a year now, and we did an assessment, an objective assessment based on our own GNU tracker that we set up, asking questions to the ministers, just performance-based, not subjective. And they came up with an F. I mean, really, it hasn't been a good time for the GNU. We took a principled decision. There was an offer made to all of the parties to join in the GNU. And we said, no, 70% is more than enough for any government. And we don't want to become a part of a big amorphous government as a tiny little party in Parliament and get lost there. And essentially, that's what the GNU has become. But you mentioned MKP. With the DA leaving the ranks of the opposition, it's left the opposition benches very, very thin. The DA was a very good opposition. I mean, they'd spent their whole existence sharpening their toolkit to be the very best opposition in the country, and they were replaced by MKP that comes out of the ranks of the ANC. It is the DNA of the ANC, the corrupt ANC. Well, the whole ANC is corrupt, but it was the fledglings of the Jacob Zuma ANC. So they have no idea how to be an opposition. All they've learned over those years is how to feather their nest, and to see two of their prominent MPs in court last week for Transnet crimes is a reflection of what they are. So the opposition benches are thin. We took a decision that we'd be a constructive opposition, support where we can and put the nation first and make the right decisions, and oppose vigorously where we have to, and that's what we've done.
I recently interviewed Helen Ziller, and she said that it seems like the opposition spirit is still alive in the DA. It just happens to be inside of government. I personally don't see the problem with coalition partners fighting. I think that's what, if you don't have an absolute majority, it makes sense to me to have coalition partners disagreeing vehemently, even challenging each other quite openly. But quite clearly, the ANC is not up for that. What do you think of partners fighting with partners?
Look, I don't think there's a problem. I mean, you and I fight with our wives, and we in relationships with them.
I do lose, though.
Yeah, so I lose most as well. But the thing is that we have a marriage agreement, and the agreement is about the marriage and the family and putting that first, not individuals first. So I think that the GNU statement of intent is a big weakness. They don't have a proper coalition agreement signed in blood, open to the public to say these are the consequences if you don't do X, Y, and Z. So that's my opinion. The other opinion about what you've just said, Mike, is that you can't be fish and fowl in politics. If you go into government, you're part of government. If you're in opposition, you're part of the opposition. You can't be in opposition in government. You can be in opposition in a coalition, but what we have is a GNU government. Call it what you like. It is actually a coalition without a coalition agreement, but you can't be opposition and government at the same time. And what we're seeing unfolding now, which is actually going to impact the budget for the fourth time. We've had 3 budget efforts, And now we're about to vote for this budget, finally, and the DA is withholding support for budgets of ministers, departments that are embroiled in corruption. Now, they've been sitting with those ministers for the last year, but they're going to withhold their votes. And now the ANC have said they're going to withhold their votes for DA ministries. So you've got a tit-for-tat situation. And if one doesn't pass, the budget doesn't pass. Then you have a massive impasse. Government can't proceed then. They can only spend so much of the budget. We have a government that is then completely hamstrung, and that's going to affect South Africans. So that's where we're heading very fast now with this GNU that just simply cannot get on with each other.
Now, I do know I've asked this question and I've had differing views. I don't see a problem with the chaos. In actual fact, I kind of relish the chaos, because I think that what we've got to do is we've got to get the system cleansed. And sometimes you've got to take the medicine, and it'll make you feel worse just after you take it, rather than, what is it we're so scared of? We lived under the Doomsday Coalition for 25 years, no problem, until Jacob Zuma was voted out. And you had the coalition of the corrupt. And, there's an upside to corruption, as I've seen. Under the presidency of Jacob Zuma, he understood that in order to steal, he had to have an economy that was working. Ramaphosa doesn't seem to understand that he's not going to get the taxes by not allowing the economy to work, which is happening.
Look, I agree with you to a certain extent. I don't believe the economy worked when Jacob Zuma was the president. In fact, that was the start of the decline of our economy. Ramaphosa took over, promised so much, delivered so little. The classic adage, the elephant gave birth to a mouse. Our economy just cannot grow now. Corruption continues. Ramaphosa has done nothing about that. So he's actually become an abject president. He had all the support in the world. He had as much support as Nelson Mandela did when he became president. Black, white, colored, Indian, from across all political persuasions, people said, okay, now something's going to happen. He's going to do something about corruption. We've seen nothing happen with the Zondo Commission. We've seen nothing happening in the National Prosecuting Authority. We've seen this latest disaster explode this weekend with Commissioner Mkhwanazi making these unbelievable allegations. So Ramaphosa's presidency has been abject, made worse by a GNU that is, for all intents and purposes, a eunuch. A eunuch like a eunuch in a brothel. All the intention, but no ability to do anything.
Yeah. Now, let's talk a bit about some of the problems. For starters, I just want to go back to Parliament, where you're actually sitting with some of the main state capture looters who are there in the benches of Mkhonto Sizwe. For somebody who's been in Parliament, for somebody that's done politics for a lot, what is it like to sit knowing what we know about those people? I mean, this is public knowledge. It's not...
Well, it's crazy, Mark. The first taste of it was when, and I mentioned this because I was doing JSC duty last week, interviewing 3 candidates for the Deputy Chief Justice. Now, the first taste of how incongruous this is that Judge Hlophe, ex-Judge Hlophe, Dr. Hlophe, was nominated by MKP to be a member of the Judicial Service Commission. Now, that was taken on review, and that case was lost, so he has never been able to serve on the JSC. Quite rightly, you can't be an impeached judge and then preside over the selection of judges. So that was the first taste. The second taste was the arrival of the so-called, they even referred to them as the ex-CEOs, Molefe, et al. They arrived with much fanfare. They sit in portfolio committees like the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, and they wax lyrical about corruption in the government when they themselves were implicated. We saw last week Molefe and Siyabonga Gama in the dock about their involvement in corruption at Transnet. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Another example was that my member on the Standing Committee on Public Accounts was involved in going really hard against the CEO of the Road Accident Fund. Now, let me tell you about the Road Accident Fund. They swallow most of the money that's linked to petrol price tariffs, tariff increases, the latest one to cover for the VAT shortfall. It just swallows up that money, and the money doesn't go to the beneficiaries of third-party accidents. So he was going hard about there must be an investigation, there must be a parliamentary inquiry. And what did he do? He received a threat from one of the MKP hoods in Parliament to say, you daren't go after the CEO, he's a wonderful CEO. Why is he wonderful? Because the allegations are that MKP and other parties were benefiting from the corruption that was going on in the Road Accident Fund. So you get an unveiled threat to say, we will take you, we see you. Now remember, that was the slogan that Duduzile Zuma used, we see you, while shopping centres were going up in flames and trucks were being burnt. He gets the same message from an MKP thug. So it's quite amazing that you get people like that who are now sitting in the benches of the official opposition when they have been deeply involved and clearly involved in corruption.
Talking about corruption, the hotbed for corruption seems to be now, because there's obviously not a lot left to steal in places like Transnet and Eskom. But it seems like the hotbed is now the Department of Trade and Industry and many of the things that they oversee. We saw the lotto getting handed to the Deputy President's wife's twin sister. We now see the IDC board being loaded with great impartial voices like ex-ministers Mufamadi and Glodlo, as well as somebody else that's been compromised going into the IDC. And then suddenly our president actually does something. He actually acts in firing somebody you must know quite well, and that's the DA Deputy Minister, Andrew Whitfield. I'm sure you had dealings with him from the Eastern Cape.
Look, I know Andrew Whitfield really well. I'm not being immodest if I say he's my protege. He took over from me in various capacities in the Eastern Cape. He's a good guy. He's completely clean. I think he's one of the most ethical politicians I know, hardworking, committed. Any MP who goes to Parliament's got small children. It's a massive commitment to the country. I tell you, some people think it's a glamorous job. It's not. It takes you away from your family, and it takes enormous dedication. But what I find interesting, you mentioned all those people. First of all, there's a constant recycling of tainted, corrupt people in the ANC. They come back as chairpersons of committees when they were ministers before. They get exonerated by the Integrity Commission of the ANC to everybody's dismay. There's just a revolving door of these people. As they leave, they go out for a while, they come back in another capacity. But the Transformation Fund is the big one in that department of Minister Tao. 100 billion rand that's going to be administered by Tao. And we know that when there are billions of rands involved, the red flags shoot up. I believe Whitfield was asking very uncomfortable questions about that Transformation Fund, how it was going to be administered. He was definitely asking awkward questions about the allocation of the lottery license. So because he was doing that, the president who never does anything, and in fact the president who didn't answer Whitfield's request to go overseas, and let's just make this quite clear. I'm not surprised he didn't answer, because he's the president who never takes a decision. But he had told his cabinet that nobody is going to go overseas, especially to America, without his authority. And what did he do? He went to America with a ragtag team of people, MPs and non-MPs.
And his white agricultural minister.
Yes, and his white agricultural minister and some business people and some sports people. And it looked like they hadn't even had a caucus before to talk about what they were going to say, because what they ultimately did was embarrass us unbelievably, where they said, look, we don't just kill farmers in South Africa, we kill everyone in South Africa.
Yeah.
So,
and we rape old women.
And everything's fine in South Africa. So it really was appalling. So I think what this Whitfield thing, it's a double-edged sword. One, Whitfield didn't go to America because he wanted to go to America or on holiday. He went to
Disneyland, did he?
No, he went there because the DA sent him there with another one of his colleagues. And it was provocative, especially in light of the fact that he didn't have authority. So they should have anticipated that. They were told. So, yeah, there was an infraction. And the DA's argument is the infraction is there, but it's not as big as people like Thembi Semelani and Minister Ntshavheni and a whole host of other ministers, and Kabane, they're from, higher education. It's just a complete disastrous equivocation. If you do something wrong, you can't compare it to other people who've done something wrong. So there were consequences to Whitfield's decision, and it was a party decision. It wasn't his own decision. I think the party could have done better defending him, not to simply withdraw after 48 hours from the national dialogue. Everyone was expecting them to withdraw from the GNU. And then they came up with this flimsy one that they would withdraw from the national dialogue that they'd signed up for in the statement of intent.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna deal with that in a second. I want to talk about our justice and security cluster. What do they call it? It's sort of the people that obviously Jacob Zuma completely dismembered. Talk about eunuchs. The queen of the eunuch brigade was being Shamila Batoy.
Yeah.
And you've been against her firing. Explain why.
Okay, so what we did, and it was a bit misunderstood at first, I called for her to be suspended and for a full-scale inquiry. Because if she was fired 6 months before the end of her term, she would in all likelihood have dragged that out till the end of her term and then had a settlement and left anyway, and the problem would have stayed behind. As you said, a hollowed-out National Prosecuting Authority, incompetent, loses one case after the other, just doesn't even follow case law. For example, the extradition of Cholota, the woman involved in Ace Magashule asbestos case. They went to America. This NPA that doesn't have money ostensibly, doesn't have the resources to do their work. They went to America, which takes money. They went to a court in Maryland, I think, and got a judgment to have this woman extradited and brought her back to South Africa. She was to be a state witness. She then recanted on that. So she was an accused. And then she, in her defense, asked for a case within a case. And it was discovered that the extradition was done in a flawed manner. Now, there was a Schultz judgment in the Constitutional Court 2 months before that about how extraditions are supposed to be done. And they're supposed to be done on the authority of the minister. The NPA didn't do that. And when Shamila Batoy was asked, why didn't you do that? Did you not discuss this matter? She said, yes, we did discuss it, but our lawyers weren't present. That blew me away, Mike, because they're all supposed to be lawyers in the NPA, including Shamila Batoy. There's case law, 2 months old, how an extradition is supposed to be done, and they do it erroneously, which compromises all other extraditions. So the NPA is incompetent. We've seen it with the Omotoso case. The people who failed and were kicked off that case were sent to then go and prosecute the Fort Hare murders, corruption, assassinations. So Shamila Batoy does not have her finger on the pulse. She might be the problem. So that problem's leaving soon. But the real problem is in the NPA. It's hollowed out, incompetent, incapable, cannot do its work.
Yeah. And then while we stick with that portfolio that causes so much heartache for South Africans, you mentioned it earlier, we have this news breaking where Mkhwanazi, the commissioner of police down in KZN, who he's getting a bit of a folklore status by being quite tough on crime, reveals some very damning stuff on Minister Senzo Mkhunu.
Yeah, so Mike, I detected even in his public statement yesterday that there's massive frustration even in the police with the National Prosecuting Authority, why they won't prosecute high-profile cases, why high-profile cases, just disappear, get taken off the dockets, get withdrawn, etc. So there's massive frustration in the police services, and I can understand that. I mean, running after criminals and arresting them is a tough job, especially nowadays. Police get shot. Then you arrest these criminals and you charge them, and then the charges get withdrawn and people walk away. And politicians love that. So, and people involved in corruption love that. So what Mkhwanazi was essentially saying yesterday, and I think this whole matter needs a complete investigation. I'm not saying that he's 100% right. And I'm not saying that his allegations are also watertight. What I am saying is there needs to be an inquiry into the police, into the crime intelligence. We've seen last week a whole number of high-profile police people getting arrested. Mkhwanazi has obviously had enough. He has become a bit of a folk hero, as you've just said. And that sometimes can be problematic in the police because then people become bigger than the law. That's something that we have to look at. But there is no doubt in my mind that where there's smoke, there is fire. And in this particular case, there's a lot of smoke. And in fact, it implicates the minister, it implicates the commissioner of police, it implicates Commissioner, I'll think of his name now, Sibia, Masemola, the police commissioner. So they're very, very serious allegations there, and they need to be investigated, because if our policing doesn't work and the prosecuting authority doesn't work, then people literally get away with murder in this country. And we've seen proliferation of drug wars and distribution of drugs in this country, and blatant corruption. It just goes unattended to. And maybe this is the gauntlet that's been thrown down, that we now need to stare down, because there's no doubt that people are aware of what's been going on. If those messages that Mkhwanazi read out are authentic WhatsApp messages and taken off instruments that were recovered in arrests, then they have got very serious implications for all involved.
Yeah, at this point, our criminal justice system seems to be so broken that you almost feel sorry for, dare I say it, for Oscar Pistorius, because he seems to be the only person who was ever prosecuted, while the Bafana captain gets shot in a house full of people.
Yeah,
and 11 years later, nothing happens. So, selective justice at its very best. But we do know that Senzo Mkhunu has been mentioned in dispatches as a potential presidential candidate. He's clearly, he proved in 2017 to be on the Cyril Ramaphosa ticket. And by all accounts, he's meant to be one of the better ANC ministers, if there is such a thing.
Yeah, well, that's the problem, really, because we're all facing it. It's coming down the pike at a great speed. Who's going to replace Ramaphosa? Well, as far as I'm concerned, you could put a broomstick there and they'd do better than Ramaphosa has. But the concern is, there's the cupboard's pretty bare in the ANC with Paul Mashatile. And I mean, he's got a lot of questions around his position in the ANC. He lives way above his means, just like Didi Mabuza, who's just passed away, the former deputy president. He lived way above his means, Mike. I mean, he owned an aircraft worth about 180 million rand. He bought a hangar for 4 million rand, bashed it down and built a new one for 10 million rand. So his aircraft and its hangar is about 190 million rand. You would have had to be deputy president for 2 lifetimes to be able to afford that kind of lifestyle. No questions. You see, Cyril Ramaphosa has been an abject disappointment for this country, because no lifestyle audits, despite all of his undertakings to do that. He is minister of his GNU cabinet, not one of those people. And now remember, they're not just ANC people, they're people from all political parties. None of them have got a performance contract. So how do you manage something that you cannot measure? And that's the problem. An emasculated ANC under weak leadership. And now, who's going to replace Ramaphosa? Mkhunu's gone. Mashatile is not going to make it. I think the spotlight is shining so brightly on him that something's going to have to give. So the cupboard is bare in the ANC.
And the talk of them going outside of the party, Patrice Motsepe?
Paul Mashatile himself said it in Parliament the other day. He said, whoever's going to become the president has to have control of the branches. Now, that's how he became deputy president. I mean, he has had a lackluster performance career for 40 years in the ANC, but he's had to jump through all the hoops to get to where he is now. I don't believe an outsider can do it. I really don't believe they can do it. Doesn't matter how much money they've got, but the ANC have shown that they like money being thrown at a problem. I think what's going to happen with this GNE looking like it's falling apart, I think that the EFF are reconsidering their position, and that the ANC might be reconsidering their position around the EFF, and that the EFF might come into the GNU if the GNU, as we know it, falls apart now. Because then, the lifetime ambitions of somebody like Julius Malema can come to fruition, because he essentially is ANC. They all have DNA of ANC, MKP and the EFF. And then maybe Malema can come back into the fold and maybe can fill a leadership vacuum. He has that kind of persona. Whether he'd be a good president or not, that's, up for massive debate. But he has the persona, and he has the presence, and he is ANC for all intents and purposes.
Yeah, and it's not like he's up against any other leadership material.
Exactly.
I think that the only person who's trying to display leadership, but it seems quite shouty and non-performative, is Panyaza Lesufi.
Yeah, but look, I think his leadership has been Gauteng-based, and it looks like even that's eroding very quickly. You mentioned how tired people of Gauteng are of living in Gauteng under Panyaza Lesufi.
And let's not forget, under his control, they lost 16% of the vote.
Yeah,
they went from 50% down to 34%.
Yeah, I think his capital has been massively eroded in the ANC. His credibility is gone, I think. So his aspirations of being more than a premier, I think, have been undermined by his absolutely pathetic performance as a premier.
Yeah, but he's quite good at making promises. But let's talk about something that you did get in the middle of, ActionSA in Parliament, and that was around the budget. You mentioned budgets earlier, and budget is going to be obviously play a bigger and bigger role. There was this impasse after the Minister of Finance seemed to tell nobody that they should expect to hear a 2 percentage point increase in VAT. That one fell over. Then the ANC doubled down to the point of going outside of their GNU partners to get support for their VAT increase. And one of the people they got support from was yourself.
Sorry, let me just please clarify that. Not for their VAT increase.
I'll clarify that.
Absolutely not for their VAT increase.
Yes.
I made it clear on the very first aborted budget that VAT must go and they must cut the fat. We never supported the VAT increase. We said we will support the fiscal framework on condition that the VAT increase is removed from the budget. That was our position.
But it became clear that the minister had no intention of doing it anyway, even after your intervention.
Well, so say some people. We have it, and the minister did. There were two parts to that court case that the DA and the EFF had against the minister. The first part, that he had no authority to increase VAT, which he contested and said he has got the authority. He has the authority to increase VAT. This part two still needs to be decided in court about how the budget process unfolds. So we said to the ANC, and we were in the Finance Portfolio Committee, we held the casting vote, where we said we do not support the VAT increase, but we will support the fiscal framework, and we made a recommendation. And it's the first time that had happened. There were many firsts in this budget, Mike. It's the first time in the country's history where the governing party didn't have a majority. I remember in the past, I've sat in Parliament and legislatures where the ANC would simply throw a budget under your nose, and if you said no, they go and vote, and they vote for it. It's done. But now, it's still not done. Even though we've had 3 iterations of that budget, it's still not done because they've got to vote for the budget on the 23rd of July. And if one department's budget does not pass, that budget will fail. So what we did was we said, okay, we will support you on condition. We're going to put South Africans first, cut the VAT, and we'll support the fiscal framework, which means that the budget process can then unfold. So that's how it unfolded. And then it came back in its 3rd iteration and it passed. But here's the other important thing that we said. We said the shortfall that you need to fund the budget that you say you're going to get from VAT, you can get from just funding SARS properly. And the minister agreed. He increased the funding to SARS. And you know what the result has been? In the very first month of this new financial year, SARS has raised 8 billion rand more than anticipated, simply from recovering outstanding tax debt. So we still believe that if you fund SARS properly, you don't have to increase VAT, you don't have to increase the fuel levy. That 8 billion rand is already more than the fuel levy increase. So if you just govern properly and stop being profligate and stop maintaining the same lifestyle that this government has become accustomed to, we can govern much better with the budget that we have. There's enough money there to govern properly. You must just change your bad habits and reduce the size of cabinet, because that's an important point, Michael.
Yeah.
We have brought 2 pieces of private members, cut cabinet perks bill and a constitutional amendment to reduce the size of cabinet by doing away with all deputy ministers.
Yeah, that's not going to pass, is it?
Well, it's got a lot of support in the smaller opposition parties. And if parties like the ANC and the DA don't support it, well, then at least they'll be exposed to the whole of South Africa that despite their commitment to cutting the size of cabinet, they enjoy the benefits of being part of a bloated cabinet.
Yeah.
So that's it. Either succeeds through the process of passing a private member's legislation, or exposes those that enjoy the benefits of being part of a bloated cabinet.
Yeah, because the deputy ministers are a ridiculous idea, and then
they serve no good purpose.
30-something portfolios is absurd.
And that's why I said, if you're going to remove Whitfield, then remove them all and make sure he's the last in the queue, not the first in the queue. because he was one of the better deputy ministers, but they have no executive authority, they have no executive power, and they serve no purpose. I'll tell you why they serve no purpose. You can be in a parliamentary question session or in a portfolio committee, and you ask a question to a deputy minister, they say, well, it's not really my responsibility, we'll have to ask the minister. So they literally are just doormen. They are doormen. They are political doormen that get paid massively, and just their existence costs the taxpayer 1.5 billion rand a year, every year.
It's absolute madness. Now, this talk of tit-for-tat budget holding back on approval.
You know, Mark, this is the one that really worries me, because if you're in opposition, and we are in opposition, so we evaluate the budget, and in the last budget cycle, we supported approximately 50% of the budget presented, and we opposed 50% of them. And it was based on performance and based on the annual performance plan of the department, the performance of the minister, and we do it on an objective basis. So it was about 50-50. Maybe it was 55-45. This time round, we've gone through the whole process again, and I've sat with my caucus last week, and we've green-lighted so many, we've red-lighted so many, and there's some that are like a mauve that we still need to decide on. But it's not a blanket no. And we've seen MK arrive, and MK just oppose everyone, every single budget. So they'll do the same thing this time. So those are 60 votes out of the 400 gone. They're going to oppose everyone. The EFF pretty much do the same and have been doing that for 10 years. They just oppose them all. So that's another, let's say, 30-odd votes gone. And now you've got the two big honchos in the GNU saying, no, we'll show you. We won't vote for the departments where you've got ministers, and we won't vote for the departments where you've got corrupt ministers. Now, that puts the whole budget process at risk. That puts service delivery seriously at risk. If you think Joburg's bad now, imagine what this city will look like when it doesn't get any equitable share and has no money to spend on service delivery, only got money to pay salaries for the next 3 or 4 months after an aborted budget. It'll be completely devastating.
Yeah.
So South Africans need to understand that this wobbly GNU has brought us to the edge of the cliff in this country. And they've got 70%. If you've got 70% of responsibility to govern a country and you don't use that responsibly, then you're being completely irresponsible. And I would venture that they have become the doomsday coalition that they said they'd save South Africa from.
Yeah. And talking of that doomsday coalition, quite clearly the doomsday in that whole coalition was the ANC, because, I mean, they're the guys that at the end of the day,
they're the leopard that won't change its spots.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we don't know about MK. We do know about EFF, but it's certainly the ANC that are the people that rip the country apart. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
So that sort of brings us back to the fact that you've got 6 bodies in Parliament, and you're doing the work of the opposition, of the 30%. If the GNU, I mean, it looks too wobbly for words, but nobody. On the one hand, the ANC won't fire the DA, on the other hand, the DA won't leave. It all seems to be a bit childish, but I do understand their internal political dynamics. What do you think happens?
Okay, so first of all, just to refer to our 6 members, it does feel a bit like deja vu, because I belonged to a political party in 1994 that expected to do much better than they did, and they returned 7 members of Parliament, and they referred to themselves as the Magnificent Seven because they did incredible work, even though they were a microscopic party in Parliament. So history would have it that I would come back to Parliament after a number of years out of politics, and I would end up leading a caucus of 6. And I told the story to my colleagues and said, we are expected to be the Super 6 now. And Herman Mashaba said to us, look, there's 6 of you, but I expect you to go and fight like there's 60 of you. And after the very first year, we did an assessment of parliamentary questions. I'm just using this as an example to illustrate something. We asked the same number of parliamentary questions as MKP did to the government. And MKP is 10 times bigger than we are. So we are certainly boxing above our weight division. But that's not going to be good enough to actually fix a really broken government. So what will happen if the DA pulls out or gets kicked out? Well, the ANC, that is the recalcitrant problem, is going to have to look for other coalition partners. Now, the one thing about history is that you should learn from history. And we learnt from this VAT process that despite the undertakings by the minister and the ANC leadership, we had multiple meetings with the NEC and the National Working Committee of the ANC and the minister, where they committed and said, we're going to do away with VAT. The way they operate is so clumsy. It takes days to get a decision from anybody. And when the agreement was made that there will be no VAT, the ANC still took 24 hours to make the public announcement. And by then, the DA and the EFF jumped on top of it, claimed victory because they'd gone to court. Imagine being in a government where you've got to go to court against each other every other day. It really shows how dysfunctional that government is. So we've learned some lessons. And we've said to the ANC, don't even look in our direction until you change your behavioral pattern. And if your commitment is dealt with the way you dealt with it during the VAT crisis, don't even bother to phone us. But we operate in a political environment, like the national dialogue, for example. We have grave reservations about the national dialogue and about how much money is going to be spent on that dialogue. But we're going to be there. We're going to make sure our voice is heard there. We're going to tell the government that what we think is the real problem in South Africa, because you cannot not be involved in something that involves your country. And we've said to the government, we want this country to work. We want this government to work. We want you to deal with corruption. We want you to deal with the NPA. All our positions on that are on the record in Parliament. We're quite careful to make sure that what we say today is backed up by what we did yesterday. You can't just wake up tomorrow and make a statement and there's nothing to back up your position the day before. So we will go to the national dialogue. We will hold this government to account. If they want our support to get this budget passed so that we can actually govern this country, they're going to have to come with an undertaking that is watertight, not what we experienced during the VAT process and not what we've seen unfolding in the GNU. Because what we see unfolding in the GNU is no change in habits, no change in behavior, and they expect everyone to just go along with them. The days of going along with the ANC are over. Even the voters stopped that.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned the national dialogue and your reservations. I've got no reservations whatsoever. I think it's a disgraceful idea. I'm dead against it. We had the biggest national dialogue in May last year, where the voters got to vote for what they liked, and they said, okay, you dialogue on our behalf, right? That's what an election's all about. You've got Parliament, that's where the dialogue's meant to happen, and decisions are meant to be reached. And now, in true Cyril Ramaphosa fashion, he sort of said, oh, let's just have an imbizo. We're going to sit around there. Yeah, by the way, it's going to cost 700 million rand. And we're going to find out what Miss South Africa and the Bafana Banyana coach has to say about politics. To me, it's the most disgraceful idea I've ever heard in my life.
That's fine. That's why I said we've got reservations about it, but we're going to participate because I believe that the dialogue, the real dialogue that you referred to in 2024, wasn't attended by the whole country. The fact that more voters, registered voters, didn't vote than those that did vote means that they weren't actually involved. The day South
Africa... that was by choice.
No, hang on. But exactly, that's a choice. Everything's about choice, Mike.
So nobody's telling me who I want at the national dialogue.
Everything's
so
about
no choice. At least there was some choice.
Everything in life is about choice. We've made a choice. We're going to attend the dialogue because we want to have input. Not attending doesn't get anything done. The day the majority of registered South African voters vote against the government that they dislike, then you will have a proper change in government. But to choose not to participate in an election, all that does is it takes an ANC with a majority and gives the ANC with the biggest share in a wobbly GNU. Nothing's changed. So that choice that they made to not participate didn't really serve their interests. So what you need to start doing is start making choices. Take a choice and get involved and make a statement. I think it would be completely puerile and false for us not to participate. If that's going to happen, and look, I'm really appreciative of people like you and other people in the media shining a spotlight on this and saying, hey, 700 million for a dialogue when people haven't got, a place to sleep, university students, and they're not getting their NSFAS funding. And we can't afford to pay people who've been involved in motor car accidents because the money's been stolen there. That is completely unacceptable. And you've got a massive role to play as the media to say, spend appropriately and proportionately. But Michael, in the grand scheme of things, 700 million rand to turn this situation around where the ANC is simply as arrogant as it was before the elections, even though they no longer have a majority. I think that's the public. It gives the public, not the people sitting in the benches of Parliament, who all have got self-vested interest. Let the people of the public, I hope Mike Sham will change his mind, that you'll go to that dialogue and that you'll give them a piece of your mind, not through a studio mic, but on national television. Tell them exactly what you think.
There's no chance that they're going to get anybody. We've already seen their eminent persons. And it's a flipping joke.
Lindy Sisulu being on that panel is a joke.
Yeah, to me as a South African, I absolutely feel insulted by the people that have been called up to that national dialogue, because are they serious or are they joking? Well, when you put a beauty queen in there, you're not being serious. I mean, it's quite simply not that difficult to work out. That here's somebody, what you're going to say. It's sort of like... It's on a similar level to having Ernie Els and Retief Goosen in the White House talking politics.
Look, that was disastrous. But you know what? You do need the average man and woman in the street to tell the government what they think, other than through a ballot, which is completely anonymous. Nobody knows what Mike Sham felt when he voted. You actually do need to hear the man in the street tell the government what they think about an initiative, even like the national dialogue. Look, I mean, you open any newspaper, you read any article, there are mixed views about it, but there is unanimity.
I'm yet to see the view that says it's a good idea.
No, there is unanimity that it is overpriced and that it is ill-conceived. But the fact that there's a requirement for a national dialogue, Michael, the one thing about this country, we've failed in so many ways, but we have averted massive disasters through dialogue. And dialogue is important, especially in a country as diverse as ours. I see it every day where people talk past each other, talk over each other, because they don't know how to talk to each other. I'm really blessed in one thing, that I speak some indigenous languages. Do you know what that does? It opens doors, because I can speak to people in a dialogue because I understand the culture, and they appreciate and that respect me because they understand that I respect them through my language. Like, I'll give you an example just to illustrate this. When I speak Xhosa and black person hears me, they're like, always, wow, where did you learn to speak that language? Every single person in Parliament can speak in beautiful English. And I've never heard one person say, wow, where did you learn to speak English like that? So we take it for granted that black people must speak English, and black people take it for granted that white people don't speak indigenous languages. And that's why we need dialogue in this country. We need to speak to each other. With each other, not at each other, not over each other, not past each other.
Yeah, that's as long as somebody listens to what's being said. I don't see that happening, because we also said we need to cleanse ourselves of the state capture by finding out who did what. We did that. And
we've done nothing about it.
Nothing about it. And I fear that I see no reason why the national dialogue would suddenly turn Cyril into action man, because
the legitimacy of Cyril Ramaphosa and his government, unfortunately, is always going to taint everything we've done, because it's all about self-preservation. You'll remember, like I remember very clearly, where Cyril Ramaphosa said he'd rather be remembered as a poor president than presiding over the division of the ANC. I told him the other day, I said, well done. You've succeeded in both.
Yeah. Let's just close off by moving our attention to, I know it's not, you've been involved in Parliament. The very same ANC that's at the root of all of our problems, ActionSA has got into bed with, certainly in Tshwane and to a lesser degree in Johannesburg. And step one of that was done by, in Johannesburg, where you did have the Speaker of the city of Johannesburg, and she was unceremoniously recently dumped by ANC because they didn't like the fact that she was asking too many questions by all accounts. What leads you to believe that the ANC in these metros is going to behave any differently than the ANC at national level?
Yeah, so it's a very good question, because what I find really curious is that there are 9 or 10 political parties involved with the ANC in the GNU. And many of those parties in the GNU with the ANC question our involvement with the ANC in Tshwane.
I can only think of two, because the rest seem to be quite comfortable the minute they
All
work
right,
with
let's say
ANC.
two do. They question it. But it's on the one hand, it's convenient and acceptable that they cooperate with the ANC. But on the other hand, when we cooperate with the ANC in another municipality, it's anathema to them. So that's the first thing. It gives you a context. The second thing is, we knew in Johannesburg that Dada Morero is an idiot. And I mean, you keep saying it, that he's the one politician who always tells the truth, or who told the truth once. He said, don't expect anything from me in 2 years, and he's fulfilled that. So we had the same reservations about Morero. So we said, we're not going to go into a coalition with you. We don't want to be involved in your executive because we know it's flawed. But we'll take an administrative post and hopefully be able to make an impact at that level through an administrative, systematic improvement of governance. It hasn't worked. And then a political party that's in the GNU comes with a motion of no confidence to remove Morero. And I know motion of no confidence. I was involved in 7. I know them intimately. And if you're going to bring a motion of no confidence, it's your responsibility as the mover of the motion of no confidence to go and canvass for support, to get it to fly. There was no canvassing. So it was stillborn. It was a stillborn conception. It was never going to fly, even if you count the numbers now. Even if we didn't abstain in that particular debate, it wouldn't have flown. So Morero would have stayed there anyway. So it was ill-conceived, all about theatre, no idea to get rid of Morero. The reality is that 3 or 4 years ago, there was an opportunity to get rid of the ANC government in Joburg, and the main other party in Joburg chose to get rid of their own mayor, because they would not cooperate with the PA, the same PA that they're in government with now in the GNU. So, must look at history, look at consistency, and there is no consistency there. So, please, Joburg is not our problem, and we've lost our speaker now, and that was a principled position. We said we're not going to go along to get along, and if we have to lose our speaker, that's fine. I feel sorry for her because I think she did a really good job, but the proof of the pudding.
She did. First action was to approve an increase in salaries for the mayoral committee.
Yeah, okay.
So
the proof of the pudding.
Great job.
The proof of the pudding that we really put a lot of store by is Nasipi Moya. And I was at the JSC, and one of the senior ANC members at the JSC came up to me and said, "Listen, I want to commend you for what your mayor is doing in Joburg."
Tshwane.
I mean, in Tshwane. And I said, "Yeah, but it's teamwork, because it's not just ActionSA." He said, "Yeah, but it's about leadership, because there wasn't leadership there before." So we do have a flag that's flying on the hill of Tshwane, which happens to be the capital city, and we're very proud of that, and we believe we can replicate that. But going into wobbly coalitions with the ANC where they remain in power,
is
very
you
different.
See your arrangement in Tshwane holding?
Well, it's holding at the moment. You know, I was a mayor once in a city where I had to rely on the EFF on a case by case. And at one stage, Julius Malema woke up one morning and said, "We're going to cut the throat of whiteness and get rid of Trollip." And that was the end of our governments. And look what's happened to Nelson Mandela Bay. We were a city on the ascendancy for 2 years by all accounts. And then since then, it's just been a complete disaster. And that coalition is made up of ANC, EFF, and all the other ragtag small parties there, with a mayor from 2-seat party, just like Johannesburg. So it's a mess. Tshwane, it's actually working. I pray that it will work, so that, you know, you need at least 5 years to turn a city around. And if it endures for the next, 18 months left, that would have given her about just over 2 years in as the mayor. And already there are signs of turnaround in Tshwane. Yeah. So I hope it does. But if it doesn't, you know, we don't have the numbers to keep it intact.
Yeah. I think you've got slightly in a scale of 1 to 10, the chances of her making it to the election, not because of the job she's doing. I really like her, and I think she's done a great job. I think they're pretty slim. I wouldn't give them more than a 1 or 2 out of that scale.
You know,
because that leopard cannot change its spots.
We're a small political party trying to make a difference in this country. We understand that we don't have a majority. We understand that some of those kind of decisions and long-term future are out of our hands. We can just do what we can and do it to the best of our ability with ethical leadership. But, you know, the signs are there that they want to change the status quo. The ANC are now going after Johan Metler.
Yes.
His appointment. We didn't appoint Metler. The previous administration appointed Metler.
You
remember the circus? Yeah, we were part of it, but we weren't in control. You remember the circus in Johannesburg about Metler. And then there's one common thread there. Metler is unimpeachable by all accounts, has got no record of any skullduggery or corruption. And the party that wants to remove him wherever he is the ANC. And the great irony was, he was even my municipal manager, but he'd been deployed there by an ANC minister because he was regarded as a Mr. Fix-It. And when you do fix things, the ANC doesn't want you. So now the hallmarks are there. If they're going after Meta, it means they don't like what's happening in Tshwane. And why don't they like it? Because it's above board. Masipi Moya toes the line of the law. And the ANC doesn't like people who toe the line of the law.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've been treated to a great insight into Parliament and the work being done there by Athol Trollip and his Super Six members of Parliament that are doing more work than parties considerably bigger than them. One common thread: misgovernance everywhere. It's down to 3 letters, A, N, and C. And, that's up to the voters to decide. We've got a local government election coming up. If you enjoy the state of your city or your municipality, or if you want your city to perhaps change hands, perhaps you're sitting there cushy in Cape Town, come and take a trip to Joburg and see what's on the other side.
And don't stay at home when elections are happening.
Yeah, I think the people watching this go out to elections. But Athol, thank you so much for joining us here. To everybody out there, Pace Car Rental, thank you for keeping us on air. To everybody, subscribe to the channel. We'll see you again on the State of the Nation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Every business needs a world-class video to show to your clients and prospective clients. When the Stream-In team isn't filming the State of the Nation, they are producing those world-class videos for companies just like yours. They have got all of the equipment, drones, microphones, whatever you need, and the technical know-how to film a proper video for your company. Visit their website.